Well, hey, thanks and welcome back to the Next Gen podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I am really excited to have a conversation with Tony Myles. I've known Tony for 31 years. We go way back and have crossed paths a number of times over the years at Next Gen conferences and different things like that along the way. But he is on the pastoral staff at Riverside Church in Minnesota. And I know he's been involved inside and outside the church in a variety of ways. He's been an author, blogger, columnist, college faculty member, coach in ministry, married to Katie with 2 boys and a girl and having a blast. And I know he loves smoothies along the way as well. So welcome to the podcast, Tony. It's so good to see you and catch up with you.
Yeah, likewise. Just fun to see you today. I'm really, I don't know, I see you today and I see our past, and I don't know if you see our young adult selves kind of in that green moment where everything was easy. And
I know.
So it's just good to go. We're still here. We're still alive. We're still doing this.
We're still doing this. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and that'd be a whole different podcast to talk about the ups and downs of ministry and inside and outside the church. But you have written a new book along with Heather Flies, and I know Heather as well. But you know, what a great book. Thanks for sending it to me. It's called Single, Dating, Friendships, and Romance. And I love this subtitle. I don't know if it's called a subtitle or not, but questions for all of your answers. So I love that little twist in the words there. Very creative. By the way, I really mean this. You are probably one of the most creative next-gen people I know, and have paid attention from a distance and rubbed shoulders with you and come up close a few times at different conferences. But it's been fun to pay attention and watch your family grow and watch your ministry grow.
Man, I'm gonna record this myself and replay it every day, because this is a great compliments. Thank you. I think, well, a couple of things. One, I believe the moment we stop being creative and we get into our routines, we start conveying that God is predictable, and he's not. He's reliable, but he's not predictable.
Right.
And so creativity, I think, is just a fun way to say, well, what else can we learn from the Lord? And, you know, we've seen people over the years who get real provocative with their questions to the point where you're like, I think now you just like asking questions.
Yeah.
Let's stay in good theology and let's be creative within it. So, yeah. And then that led to the book. We just couldn't find a book that Heather and I were just kind of looking for, without even knowing. We were both individuals looking for a book, couldn't find it. And I just kept coming back to this idea of, man, I just feel like there's a lot that really needs to be explored in the scriptures on these topics. And a lot of books exist that are really good advice-giving books, but we wanted to do something different where we didn't want to give advice. We wanted to say, so we want to honor your question, and we want to actually even question what you believe already. So that's the whole questions for all your answers. Mm-hmm. And let's see what God has to say about it. And so we bring students and young adults and whoever's reading this book. I know of like people in their 40s reading this right now, which we target, but they're getting a lot out of it. And then just saying, so yeah, whether it's singleness or dating or friendships or romance, what do you think that God may actually have a larger thought for you on? And how can we even give you a better question by the time it's all done?
Yeah, so good. Yeah, obviously this is a really old topic. It's been around a while. You know, the whole sex, dating, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I think I've done that series. You maybe have done that series in the past where just stole it from culture. And then you get into the dilemma and the awkwardness of, do we do a series on this? Do we talk about this? How do we talk about this? How do we partner with parents? We don't want to cross lines that we shouldn't cross or whatever. But again, love the creativity. But let's go back for a second before we talk about the details of the book. You've been doing this a long time. I mean, what have you seen change over time as it relates to this area, friendship, dating, romance? What's I guess what has changed and what has just stayed the same over time?
Well, a lot of this that maybe, our generation and even just a little after dealt with, we would just call the purity movement or the true love waits movement.
Right.
And very well-intentioned, very well-meaning movement. There was a lot of good that was done. There was a lot of a reset that was done there, but that was on the heels of the 80s. So in the 80s, you've got everybody living for pleasure, drugs, sex. I mean, all this is elevated. And then suddenly we have all these new sexually transmitted diseases. That was a huge, huge thing between the late 80s, early 90s.
Mm.
And so True Love Waits is basically the church's response to say, we need to do something tangible to get our kids saying no to sex and yes to God. And again, very, very well meaning. I know even as a youth worker, kind of starting out in that generation, that era, kind of mid 90s, I thought, yeah, like we need to do this. And I remember we signed purity pledges, and
Right.
there's even one year where our student ministry at the time, we skipped the Super Bowl and we had our students sign this big poster during halftime, I should say,
Yep.
and we took out a page in the newspaper and said, we're all committing ourselves to the sexual,
Right.
and like it's good stuff,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot of the why. There wasn't a lot of the wrestle. And so now you have a lot of famous deconstructionists who are saying, man, that was the worst thing I could have ever done. It made me uptight. It didn't prepare me to talk to anybody at all. And so
Yeah.
the 2000s, those early 2000s were really the sort of pushback on it all. And we get into even the 2010s where people are like, yeah, this and that. And like this guy who wrote that book is now an atheist. And so there's all this sort of deconstruction going on.
Right.
And in the meantime, you have a lot of students who are lost. You have a lot of parents who know what they don't want to do, but they don't know what to do. But the conversation is still there. I think it was just over the last few years, we're seeing that even now it might be where a person, 1 out of 5 Christians will get to age 50 and they may not get married. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. But the thought is like even relationships in general are afraid. So one of the things I'm seeing, and maybe you're seeing this too,
Mm.
is students are afraid to label what they have. They're dating, but they don't want to call it dating.
Right.
Or they're flirting, but they don't want to call it flirting. Like
Right.
I think everybody's so afraid of the labels. It's like, okay, well then let's just get rid of the labels and let's talk about what God talks about. And he talks about relationships. He talks about networking yourself into communities that are going to help you to grow with all of the things that he dreams for you. So while a lot of things maybe have changed semantically, they really haven't changed foundationally. We still need Jesus. We still need to take steps to get ourselves into relationships, whether it's for friendships or marriage or otherwise.
Yeah, that's so fascinating that you brought up the label thing, because even with my own kids, I have run into that. 24, 21, 17-year-old, and like, hey, I'm going to a coffee shop with a girl, my son might say, or my daughter might say with a guy, and like, oh, is this a date? Oh, no, it's not a date. It's like, well, what is it? It's like, what's the, oh, we're just hanging out.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, let me know when it's called a date, or, and you're right. There's a fear, or there's a not wanting to be put into a box or labeled a certain way to describe what that is, even though there might be feelings one way or the other about this, and exploring what long-term things might be. But yeah, that's fascinating. I think that's absolutely true.
Well, and I'm not a sociologist, so this is just my,
Yeah.
amateur observation at this point. But I wonder if there are two reasons for that. One might be that we know that culture has really tried to leverage new labels on things that are traditional. So you can no longer use the word spouse; you have to use the word partner, or
Right.
I'm just like, no, I'm saying spouse. I'm saying husband or wife. That's not your partner. That's your boyfriend, your girlfriend. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
That's kind of my little
Yeah.
tiny little soapbox. So it could be that kind of stuff. But I think on the flip side, this is a generation that's grown up on camera more than anyone else has, because we keep whipping out our phones as parents. We keep, every little thing they do. And so I wonder if they're just afraid to get caught saying they're going on a date because now we've got footage of it, so I don't know. I just noticed like now I need to check in with my kids, and I understand why, but I check in with my kids. I'm like, hey, I just took this really cool photo. Is it okay if I post it?
Right.
Let me see it first. Like there's just a lot of that goes on.
Totally.
So maybe it's both those things.
Yeah, could be. Well, how do you think pop culture, movies, celebrities, I know you address a little bit of that in the book, have impacted this whole idea, this whole friendship, romance, dating scene? What kind of influence has that had on the next generation?
Well, and I don't know if this has ever not been the case, but obviously a movie gives you one of two things. Social media is going to give you one of two things. It's going to give you either the real pretty version or the ultimate ugly version. And
Mm.
'cause that's why we pay attention. We tune in to see the good ending, or we tune in to see somebody who has it worse than we do. And I think even the influencers that we're seeing right now in this moment that are having a big influence are the ones who are going, "Yep, I'm a no makeup girl now. I'm not going to wear any makeup, and we should all do this. We should all be individuals." And I love how they're trying to get everybody to be individuals with them,
Right.
which which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
But then, you flip that, and then you have these lives that just seem great and awesome and well put together. And you've got power couples like, Zendaya, who's just obviously in this interesting place with Tom Holland. And yet, like we love watching other people who we go,
Yeah.
yeah, I want what they have. And in the middle of it all, there's us. And we're
Mhm.
just scrolling our way through the day, trying to understand why our life doesn't look like theirs.
Right.
I mean, I think it was recently researched, was showing that like people are now communicating with chatbots that they can personalize to learn how to talk to, uh,
Wow.
which I believe. So like a month ago, I took a group of students from each of our campuses, a group of guys from one campus, a group of girls from another campus, to a baseball game, Twins game here in Minneapolis. And we've got 10th grade guys and ninth grade girls, so they're right there with each other. And there's a little bit of like like looking at each other as we're walking from the parking garage to the stadium. We're in rows in front of each other, and I'm watching the girls kind of grab their phone and like strategically take selfies with the guys behind them. But nobody's
Yep.
talking to each other. Nobody's talking.
Right.
And then
Right.
we through the whole game, and they're clearly into one another, but nobody say anything. We go through the whole game. We walk all the way back to the car, and like 10 seconds before we get in the car, one of the girls and guys swap Snapchat with each other. And so they get in the car, and now it's on. Now all the guys in my
Yeah.
vehicle are scrolling and going, "Who's she tagging and who's this one?" And they're all looking. And while they're consumed with being on the phone with each other, like in the back of my van, the
Mhm.
girls pull up alongside of our car on the highway, and they're doing these heart things out the window at the guy. And the guys, and literally in the moment, they're going, "How do we find these girls?" I'm like, "They are outside the window right now, flirting with you." And they go, "Oh, what do we do with that?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What do you do with that? You either just..." So we kind of arranged. We're gonna go to this ice cream place. We're all gonna meet up. And this was like on the spot in that moment. We get there, they all get out. Nobody's talking to each other. Nobody's talking to each other.
Right.
And
Yep.
as adults, we're just going, do we need to like take them for a walk around the block? And we
Right.
did. Still didn't talk to each other. So I think that's what's going on. Is nobody knows how to do this in the everyday level because
Yeah.
celebrity culture, social media culture has made it this huge construct of something impossible. And meanwhile, God is whispering invitations to us every day. And that's what we
Right.
get to do instead.
Yeah, that's so good and illustrated so well. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And then you have, Taylor Swift, who writes all the breakup songs. And then you have this image of, it's never going to go well. And, or I'm going to make 1,000 mistakes, which we might, along the way at different levels, to learn as we go. And then the joke is, has she written the breakup song yet for Kelsey? The whole the
Right.
whole thing that's going on.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think because of how we've done this wrong, tell me if I'm wrong here. But I think that we look at the Taylor Swifts, we look at the songs she's written. That's why a bunch of next generation are connecting with her because I've gone through that too. I that was my story. My
Mhm.
story was the breakup story. My story was didn't get it right, went too far, whatever it is, wherever the lines and the boundaries are. And I can relate to that. And she's a good songwriter. Um, and that's why she's a billionaire today. You can see it playing out in pop culture 1,000 times over. That's just one example.
Yeah. I want to always remember because I'm just inclined as you are to go, "Hey guys, be careful of Taylor Swift." Like not because
I
she's
know.
evil, but just
Yep.
she could become your truth source. Let's just say.
Yes, absolutely.
But I don't know about you, but I remember the first time I got my first set of headphones, and it was a Walkman for me,
Yep.
and just putting it on, going, "Man, these people get me." Like like just that sense,
Right.
like, yeah. And then it wasn't what it was back then, it is now, but you start learning things about your favorite celebrities, your favorite musicians, and you go, oh, I don't know if I want that lifestyle.
Right.
And what I think is the opposite is I think the Disney Channel really hit this with the Jonas Brothers and Miley Cyrus and all those in the
Mm-hmm.
2000s. But let's find a sweet brand and protect it. And you're no longer Joe Jonas. You're now a brand.
Yeah.
You're no longer Miley Cyrus. You're not a brand. So Taylor Swift is not just Taylor Swift. She's a brand, but her
Right.
brand is the girl next door, even though she's clearly living a life that the girl next door is not living.
Right.
So I think it's teaching our students to sort of like, yeah, have fun with it, see through it. There's a reason why Culture said her album had all these explicit songs on it. Maybe you might want to think about listening to them too. But
Right.
she's a human being. We should pray for her. We should think about how to learn from celebrities from afar and
Yeah.
go right or wrong. What are they doing? What might people be saying about me if they're looking at me? Does it
Yeah.
matter if I'm following the Lord? Like again,
Right.
I think culture is meant to be an object lesson. It's not meant to be the focal point.
Yep. Great. How does I know you touch on this in the book as well? How does God's unconditional love matter in this whole friendship, dating, romance area? What
Mhm.
difference does that make in the life of the next gen?
Well, so one of our favorite things to do is to, in our ministry, is to try to give students a voice, and
Mm.
it's fun because it helps them to learn how to speak, how to be a teacher. We kind of give them mini opportunities, like we'll bring them up on stage for games, or we'll say, hey, who has an opinion about this random topic that's not going to be embarrassing, and we give them a microphone. But recently, we had a student who got up on stage, and as she was saying things, as they're coming out of her mouth, I'm going, "That's in the book." Like it was just fun to hear. I'm like, "You
Awesome.
absorbed this truth." And so, what she was saying to your question is one of the most important truths, which is two people in a relationship with each other are not meant to complete each other. I
Mm.
think this whole 50-50 thing, and I'm not the first one to say it, but 50-50 relationship just doesn't work. It's 100%, 100%.
Yep.
And I'm in a covenant with God and how I'm living, you're in a covenant with God and how you're living. And the cool thing is if you have two whole people in a relationship with each other, then the relationship is whole. But if one of you is looking to turn the other person into a savior,
Yep.
or the other person into, instead of praying to God now, I'm going to start telling you all my stuff, then that's where it really gets into trouble.
Right.
So all throughout the book, we're just weaving in this idea of like, this only works if you have a relationship with God. So
Yeah.
how will you use this thing we just talked about to grow your relationship with God? And that's really it, because in the end, they're going to put this book down, but hopefully they won't ever put down the relationship with God. So
Right.
this is part of that process. And then along the way, okay, now that you've got a relationship with God, how can you, in the unconditional love he's given you, be a friend? How can you look to be a servant in a relationship? Like, a lot of times the whole thing is like, what's the point of a dating relationship? Well, the classic Christian answer is dating is meant to prepare you for marriage. And so if you're not going to marry somebody, don't date them. And I think that's an arguable point. You could say that. But I also think that dating is meant to help you to bless the life of somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not you end up marrying that person, if you're in a relationship with them, if things end, can you look at each other and go, hey, we made each other better for Jesus.
Right.
We made one another notice the love of God that much more.
Mm.
And even though our paths are diverging now, I'm going to take this into my future, whatever, singleness, marriage. And so that's really kind of the point of absorbing that love of God, sharing it, being a blessing, and then seeing where it leads to relationships.
Yeah. That's great. Great wisdom right there. So how do um, students are going to mess up. They're going to go too far physically or whatnot. And they, whether it comes out in a small group environment, in church, on a retreat, or wherever it comes out and leaks out, and you share with your friend and whatever, and how you crossed a boundary, went too far, that kind of thing. What's the advice, or what does the book say about the advice of coming alongside and seeing the unconditional love of God and the redemptive part of that, the forgiving part of that?
Mm.
What's your advice around how to help that? Because in the olden days, because we're old, is I remember the whole like second virginity, and you can fully be redeemed, as if there aren't consequences to going too far. But on the other hand, it's right. It's this balancing act of God's redemption and forgiveness for sure, and His grace, but there still might be some hurt and some pain that comes from not doing it His way. So how do you address that in the book, and what advice would you have?
Our very first chapter is called Can You Be Trusted with a Pen? And the reason I was inspired to go there was because on a Wednesday night, at the end of the night, we realized a group of students we'd handed pens out to had just played with them, broke them, and the ink was all over our church chairs. So
Yep.
I thought, boy, I wonder if I should just even ask this question next week. And it just so happened that I was talking about relationships that next week. So I brought it up and I said, hey, who in this room can be trusted with a pen? And they all raised their hand. And I said, okay, interesting you all said that, because here are some photos of what happened last week. And I had them up on the screen. I showed them the pen. I said, even just holding it, your choices have marked me. I've got marks on me now from your choices. I said, so we're going to talk about relationships tonight. How many of you now think you can be trusted with a relationship? And of course, no hands went up in here.
Yeah.
I said, okay, Here's the good news. You're going to stumble in this, and thankfully a pen is a pen. We might need to pay for a chair now to be replaced, and there are going to be consequences to your choices. But now that you know, what are you going to do? Now that you realize this. And so we kind of played that in the first chapter, and literally walking them through, like, when you got a pen in your mouth, or in your hand, are you chewing it? Is it on your mouth? Are you putting things on it that are not meant to do that in context? And so every chapter, we just kind of like, we do this thing where we have like a little point where we say, hey, like, let's write something right here. Let's stop. Let's keep going. Let's stop. Let's keep going. And so with that one in particular, it's, now, how have you crossed the line? And now that you know, what will you do next? So there's sort of this like, yeah, we're going to put our arm around you and say, this is where you're at. But now let's go forward. Let's go forward together.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. I love that. That's a great illustration, and I have experienced that as well with pen ink on the walls and the chairs and the floors, or some other liquid of some sort or something like that.
Yeah.
For sure, that's a real deal. What principles are you pulling from the Bible that help along the way, just to come alongside students and help them see from a biblical perspective what God thinks about dating, friendship, marriage, eventually maybe?
I think it goes back to a couple of things. One is the formation of the book. I couldn't find this book. And again, there's a lot of great books out there. I'm not dogging them, but I was specifically looking for, how will we take students into the scriptures? And so things that even like, you would write off and go, oh, this doesn't apply, skip over it. Because let's be honest, the word dating doesn't appear in the Bible. So what do we have? We have arranged marriages. So let's start there.
Right.
So I kind of,
which isn't a bad idea, by the way. I'm not opposed to that.
Yeah.
When you have your own children.
Sometimes, like, I just want to match you up. Let's just do this.
Yep.
Yeah. But for us, we would write that off, and students would write that off. So let's just be honest. So at the beginning of that chapter, we say, how many of you would like this? No, of course not. It's such a stupid idea. They were so archaic back then. But well, hang on a second. Hang on. What if somebody who knew you really, really, really well, and somebody who knew somebody else really, really, really well, could see in you and see in that person things that they thought would bless you, not only in life, but spiritually, where they'd go, this is a great spiritual match. Would you be open or closed to them telling you what they think? And of course, if you're wise, you're going to go, well, I'm not saying I'm going to do what you're going to say, but I'll at least listen to it.
Yeah.
So we just sort of get into this concept of, really the takeaway then is, so will you seek out people in your life who love the Lord and love you, and ask them for their wisdom in your relationships? You don't have to get an arranged marriage, but can we take the value from that and apply it? And so things like that, I think, like, we're like, okay, how do we leverage these things from the scriptures? And so Heather and I both were like we love this idea of getting our kids into the Bible and making them see what was written then is still what we need to read now. We just have to interpret it through some of that cultural handoff.
Yeah.
And then to flip it, going back to, like, you and I both celebrating major anniversaries this year, right? 30 years
Right.
being married to our spouses. Okay.
Right.
So people would ask us, well, how do you do that? And so if you've got 10 seconds, you might say, well, my spouse is my best friend, which is true. But it's also a lie, because some days my spouse doesn't feel like my best friend. Some days my spouse feels like somebody that hasn't known me for years. Somebody,
Right.
like, do you even know me? And that's to flip that. I'm that way to her too. But because of the love and the commitment,
Right.
it's a messy, beautiful thing. So yeah, we are each other's best friend. But how do you become somebody's best friend? Through commitment, through endurance, through
Yeah.
grace, through all of those things. And we can't just give a quick bumper sticker thought that doesn't honor the mess of the journey underneath all of that.
Sure.
So I think it's honoring the scriptures, but not looking for the quick bullet takeaway. It's going, man, I need to enter that much more. I need to go into that much
Hmm.
more. And so for me, I think the biggest thing I'm seeing in the scriptures these days is I still don't know what I'm doing every day, but
Mm.
God does, and I'm going to trust him, and I'm going to
Right.
lean on him. And that seems to be working out much better than if I were to do it myself.
Yeah. Good. That's good. So back to your illustration about, those two groups of high school students hanging out and feeling vibes, but not be able to communicate with one another. Because I just think about, and I think this is absolutely true of the next generation in general, is they would rather text, Snapchat, do some other form of communication than actually sit with one another and have a conversation in a coffee shop or beyond. And it seems like half the battle, maybe it's not half, I don't know what percentage it is, but is just, can we give you the skills to
Mm.
just have a conversation with somebody? And if it happens to turn and you're not going to head into this dating relationship or whatever they call it these days,
Mhm. Right.
you're not going to do that. Then how do you do that face to face rather than break up, so to speak, over a text or over in the whole conflict resolution piece of this whole thing in friendship in general that may not even head towards dating and that kind of thing. But I'm sure I'm finding that just the skills to be able to have a conversation with somebody face to face and walk it through with them. And even though it might be difficult, I don't feel great about this, but we're going to navigate it because we love one another and we're committed to this thing.
Mm.
Any advice that you give along the way in the book or otherwise, just how do we help the next generation do that a little bit better?
We do address this throughout the book, just the idea that this is your generation, this is how you do things.
Yeah,
Try to be very careful to not be critical of that, because it's
sure.
just their starting point, and some of that's on us as parents. We've handed them phones at a very young age. We've said,
Right,
communicate your most meaningful things to me throughout the day, send me texts. So
right.
we've trained them to do that. I
Mm,
also think that they're at a point where they even try to pick their social media area. So, it used to be, it was when it all first came out, it was Facebook, and then nope, now it's Twitter, and then it's Instagram, and then it's Snapchat,
yep.
and then it's Be Real. And ironically, I'm getting friend requests on Facebook now from a lot of students that I work with. They just came back to Facebook for some reason. So
Yeah, interesting.
yeah, so there's need to pick their territory. But then coming back to your question, how do we do this? I think we need to just set our phones down too a whole lot
Mm,
more. And I find myself like, this is just me, but like I'm on my laptop a lot. I'm always working
yep,
on something
yep.
if I have time to do it, because that's my thing. Like I don't hunt or fish or golf. I'm like a weird pastor. I don't do any of that stuff. I don't watch ESPN religiously. Like for me, being creative is my thing. And it just so happens that a
Mm,
laptop is my tool. So a lot of times I'll be working at night, just getting a thought out on my laptop, and my daughter will want to talk to me. She just turned 14. And I realize she started talking. I closed the lid right now and I look at her and I just model that.
yep.
And so I think some of it has to do with us. Like if we're bringing our phones to the table, if we're modeling to them that we're always on and we're never off,
Yep.
then they're just going to think that that's behavior that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing too is we can, in church environments, we can set up spaces. So we didn't do this year, but last year at our summer camp, we had this whole like breakout session of just have a conversation with somebody around you. And so they did. And then we said, okay, now have the same topical conversation with somebody of the opposite gender.
Mm.
And the high school students were kind of like, okay. And the middle school students flipped out. Like they just did not know what to do.
Yeah,
So, but that idea of like just teaching, just talk about something that's easy to talk about with
sure,
somebody else face to face. And I will say the girls stepped up a little bit more than the guys did in that one,
sure.
but it's those things like, can we just build those in to what we do? And I think
That's
we can.
great.
I think we can.
Yep, that's great. A couple more questions for you. How do we come alongside parents in this whole journey of friendship, dating, that kind of thing? I don't know about you, but my upbringing was my mom and dad handing me a book to read about the birds and the bees and all of that. And then it was, hey, if you have any questions about that, let us know. Um, it's obviously the lid has been blown off. And I think I would have said back then, now that I listen to the 80s tunes that we listened to, oh my gosh, it was sexualized all then too. But now I might say that, man, it's gone to a different level. It's gone to there's nothing off limits. There's nothing private. It's all seems to be public now. But what do we do? How do we come alongside parents to coach them, help them with friendship, dating, heading towards romantic things? And on one hand, I could see, I probably fall into this category too, where parent freak out, like, oh my gosh, there's no way, to the other end of being oblivious and just letting them figure it out on their own. So what ideas do you have for us to come alongside parents?
I think there's a lot of it just comes back down to that whole like train up a child in the way they should go or the
Yeah.
way that he or she is bent. And for each of my kids, like so my oldest, he's 23, and he's very much like he has chosen to grow in this season and is now at a place where he's like, hey, I'd love to be in a relationship if I can find the right person. And he's not like he's looking, he's being careful, he's being selective.
Yep.
My next son on down really feels called to a life of singleness for as a way to honor God. He kind of really heard that, kind of that Pauline idea of like, this is a good thing. And he's like,
Yeah.
that sounds great. I want to do that. And then my daughter's 14 and she's like, I don't know what I think yet. She's just sort of, kind of in that space, but I could see her
Sure.
at some point doing that. She told me she wasn't going to read my book until she turned 14. So it
Okay.
happened a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
So I think on one hand going, okay, who are your kids? What do they need? And so for me, I go to my 23-year-old and I say, hey, how can I in this season be praying for you? Or how can I help you to see things about you? And he comes to me, he's like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing. And I don't want to tell secrets, but he's like, I think
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, do you want me to be a part of that or not? And so we're just always checking
Yeah.
in with each other. Um, with my daughter, it's the same thing, where I'm like, hey, at some point, I'm just going to bring up the topic of boys, and I want you to be thinking about questions that you want to ask me in those times, or if you want to bring it up, you can. So we'll just do that, and we'll check in with each other. We did a late night run to White Castle a couple weeks ago, and I said, should we have the boy conversation now? She's like, no, I'm good. I'm like, okay.
Okay.
So
Yep.
I think that's one thing. I think another thing, going back to what you just pointed out too, is media. What do we as a family champion?
Mm.
Are we watching shows? Are we watching movies?
Yeah.
Conflict with the values that we say we believe. And most of us, we love entertainment, but there's a difference between entertainment and restoration.
Right.
Sometimes we entertain ourselves and we're just as tired at the end of it because we just occupied ourselves for an hour versus doing something that is restorative. And so I honestly think sometimes it's instead of the TV, let's go throw the ball around in the backyard, or instead of
Yeah.
that, let's go on a hike, or let's go on a road trip, or we've done these milestones with our kids. We're at certain ages, it's like, okay, we're doing this trip, and then we get to this point, and you're planning the trip, and here's the budget, and so it's just building the relationship with each other.
Yeah. That's good.
But then finding a resource, and again, I'm going to sound biased, but we wrote this book to
Right.
the kind of thing that parents can go through with their students, where it's not embarrassing, but it's honest. And
Yep.
having that tangible resource where they can go, hey, why don't you read the first week, and at the end of it, come back and let's talk about it. And I'll be reading
Yeah.
it, or let's read each day together. Like just doing something like that. I think those are the tools that we can put in their hands.
That's good. That's really good. And I hear two things in that I absolutely resonate with, Tony, and I know this is true of your family too, is there's intentionality. you're being very intentional in what you're doing, whether it's planning the trip or who plans the trip and that kind of thing, all the way to White Castle runs or whatever it is. There's intentionality. And I think there's a lot of parents that are just coasting, probably, if I'm just kind of leaning in on this podcast, whoever's listening, where we just sort of sit back and coast, especially during adolescence, teen years, where we think, you know what, they look like an adult, they probably are like an adult, and then we just sort of kick back and let them figure it out on their own. I think that's a mistake. I think we got to be intentional. The other thing, second thing I hear is just over communication, which is a big part of our family as well. And if I had to drill down to one thing, that's, I think I can make an argument biblically, but just in general, are you over communicating in all forms possible with your kids? You know,
Mm-hmm.
do you know what's going on? Because not just because you're asking questions, but you're asking intentional questions that are open-ended and not just yes or no or a grunt.
Yeah.
It's a conversation that's happening. And then for us, we enter into their world. I know you do too. Whether it's social media, whatever. It's like I don't care if it's embarrassing for me to follow your Instagram feed or be on Snapchat with you. I'm going into that world with you. Not because I'm looking over your shoulder, but because I want relationship with you. If you were to give kind of some final thoughts to the church, to youth workers, to those who are in church world about this whole topic, I'll leave it open-ended for you. What advice would you give youth pastor, youth worker, even kids director, because these things are being talked about younger and younger?
There's certainly an expectation, more so, that people are going to be in a marriage one day. And I think we use that language. We promise heaven on earth in the form of a marriage. And maybe that's just because we really want to outsell the world. But I don't think we need to create false promises for that.
Yeah.
We can talk about enjoying where you're at right now.
Right.
Making this season, not the season before something finally happens, but this is the season that something can happen, this moment right now. So if you're single, and by the way, we're all going to be single at some point in our life. You might be single again if your spouse passes before you, if you do get married. So grow into what singleness means. Grow into knowing that this is a gift from God for you to have that much more time to explore who you are, who He is, so that any friendship, any dating relationship, even romance, like, you're not doing romance to prove something. It's meant to be a gift to somebody else. I thought of you in a real sentimental way, and I just want to let you know about it. So the overflow of that is from a place of wholeness and not what's next, because that's really what we see. You're in kids ministry. Well, when you get into student ministry, you're in student ministry. Well, when you graduate and you go to college, you're in college. Well, when you get into college, you got to do college ministry. Well, then what? Well, I guess you got to get a career, and you got to be like, there's all these cultural benchmarks, and there's never a celebration of where they're at, and slowing down and an appreciating of God in Jesus and the Holy Spirit just doing that magnificent work today when that thing hasn't happened yet. So I don't know if we even live that way. So maybe that'd be the first. Do we live that way?
Yeah.
Or, I can't. Yeah. You guys, we just got done with camp. When do you get ready for the next mission trip? We got rid of the mission trip. When do you get ready for camp? Like, you got to be careful about being these big benchmark people and be still and know that He is God.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah, that's a good way to kind of conclude this whole thing as well. And, just a reminder for everybody tuning in, Single Dating, Friendships, and Romance. Heather Flies, Tony Myles wrote the book. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
And go out and grab one, parent, coach, teacher, youth worker, kids director. Thanks for leaning in on this topic. Thanks for writing this book. And thanks for doing it in a format. It's a 40-day devotional that you can walk through, and it's interactive. And so I think that's the best way probably to approach this topic, as opposed to making a ginormous commitment that we probably can't keep, and we stumble and fall, and then we feel defeated and that kind of thing. So a very graceful way of presenting this topic that's super, super important. So thanks for doing it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we would be happy if anybody wanted to look Heather or I up. We'd be happy to just serve you guys independently or collectively through connecting with us. So just find me on all the socials at Tony Myles, TonyMyles. And we would love to even do teaching for you guys if you want to. But otherwise, that's
awesome.
Into the book too.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony. Thanks for being on the Next Gen podcast here at Mission
Yeah.
Hills. I appreciate it. Great to catch up with you too.
Yeah, I love this. I love what you're doing. Thanks, Jeff.
This podcast is hosted by me, Jeff Baxter, along with special guests who are experts in the industry. We're mixed and edited by Leopard Productions. Our senior producer is Colin McFarland. Our video director is Zach Anderson, and our digital and SEO specialist is Maddie Brower. The Next Gen podcast is part of a Mission Hills podcast network here at Littleton, Colorado. Thanks for listening.